Well, my fellow engineers, you've done it. You've made it to a very crucial stage now. By the end of this video, you're going to have every vanilla science set up and ready to go. We're also going to have some basic solar farms up, a fairly staple mid-game power supply that can easily take you to the end game of vanilla should you desire. Before we do that, you might begin to notice a few issues if you've been playing along with the series, especially if you've been copying the general design flow that we've chosen. To start, we're under constant biter threat from colonizing parties all over and around us. To catch you up to speed, biter nests will periodically send out little parties that aren't triggered by pollution clouds. Instead, these parties go seek out spots to start new nests, and after remaining in an area long enough, will populate with new hatcheries and worms. And since we tend to neglect them if they're not actively attacking us, we're starting to have some issues with returning neighbors. This forces us to periodically go out and clean nests, which can get a little tedious if we're not fully defending. So, for this video, we will first tackle our final two sciences, utility and production, or yellow and purple juice. These ones will be your most complex sciences to make, but will still be manageable as long as you keep your belts semi-organized, even chaotically so. After that, we will take some time to explain two important things we haven't delved into too deeply. The first being long-term biter defense, and, in conjunction with that, blueprints. After that, the next video will head to the final stage of vanilla for many, the rocket launch itself. A very exciting stage for any new engineer and only the beginning of the real game later on. But that's later. For now, science. So we've already covered this some. I'm going to reiterate a little bit as I show this build really quickly. We have utility science set up there already. We're just going to copy and paste the layout up above, then work our way front to back on ratios that we want for this. I then decide how many machines I want and where to place them, and bring the appropriate materials up. This is about as close as we'll get to a bus design in the series, but it's mainly just bringing materials on site for manufacturing. We're still holding true to the semi-complex spaghetti joy that every beginning engineer should embrace, not fear. But we do determine these ratios as we've done in the past, so I'm not going to waste too much time today discussing the exact math behind them unless someone gets confused by it. Once we have the setup, we're then going to join it with our utility science, and now we have all of the vanilla science in one nice place, with a science setup that will be feasibly good enough for vanilla endgame should you choose to keep it. While we've been building this, I had to set up a secondary power supply using solar panels, mainly because our steam engines are failing to meet our power demand. And I lack the willpower to go and clean out a larger biter area just to add another steam engine block at this time. Finally, we also need to upgrade our copper smelters from the stone furnaces and steel furnaces that we had to electric. The reason that we want to do this is because we want to get away from the dependency of having coal for the fuel on the furnaces, and instead we want coal to be regulated to specific products that need it, and we want it to go towards our first power supply. We are also going to expand our green circuit production. This is still not enough for what I would normally want in one of my more normal runs, but at the pace that we're doing, this is going to be just fine, and this will be a steady enough trickle to all of the pertinent places that we can essentially go to endgame with just this alone, and I'm okay with that. Once we have all of these things set up, it's now time to discuss the true topic of today's video, the defense. And, in conjunction with that, blueprints. Defense is something best discussed live, and as we're making the defense grid itself. In order to properly set up defense, we need to determine our strategy for it. At this point, we have multiple technologies researched that give us options, and what we haven't researched, we possess the technology to research it quickly enough. And with construction drones, we are now primed for large construction projects. In order to facilitate that, it is wise for us to develop blueprints that we can use to speed up the process. Copy and paste works fine, but it's just not as versatile and it's not as memorable. So, we're going to go to a live recording of myself explaining in more detail how I'm going to go about designing these blueprints, some neat little tricks that make life a little bit easier, and the method I'm going to choose for defending my territory, and the reason why I'm choosing to do that. Alright, now we're live and we're ready to start tackling the problem. So, the first thing that we need to determine is our problem areas, which obviously we've got a lot of problem areas, and unfortunately we don't have a whole lot of choke points necessarily, at least that we can see. We do have one here. One up here we can use a little bit. I am seeing a little bit of a choke area we could kind of lock down here to protect the oil that we've got there. And some areas here that we could kind of utilize as well. And then I'm looking if we want to kind of lock ourselves in a bit, we could do an area here, maybe here, there, check that place out. We've got a nice little barrier there, so feasibly, these are kind of our interest points that we want to look at. However, before we get to that point, we need to decide how are we going to actually power this? Or how are we going to feed the defenses? So the number one thing that I always look at before I start to do this is I look at what are our current problems. And right now, obviously, power is a very large concern. So with power being a large concern, what are the things that we have an abundance of? And from what I can determine here, if we take these away, we already know that we have a large amount of iron that we're able to get access to from the local mine right here we're finishing up. And we've got this mine that we're pulling from that has plenty of resources as well. We also have a large amount of oil coming from here, and then we're going to have some more from here, 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 there, there, and there. So, with that in mind, the design that we're going to do for this time is going to be a little interesting. Typically what you'll see a lot of people do for sake of ease is do something to this effect, where you set up a bunch of laser turrets, maybe in a line like so, and then have them powered by some substations that kind of sit in the back. Something like this going along to power everything. And then something right here along with some walls going like so, and then you'll see something called a dragon's teeth design, which is usually something to this effect. But essentially you do this to kind of mess with some of the pathfinding, and it doesn't really hurt to do this. And then you would supplement this with some roboports way in the back here, equipped with some construction robots and some replacement parts for the walls in particular, but also for laser turrets and repair packs in order to maintain integrity. The only problem with this is that every laser turret takes up 800 kilojoules of energy per shot. You get a lot of these on your defenses, this is going to be a huge power sink. And right now we can't afford that power sink. Essentially what we want to do is we need a design that we can set up in areas that are able to lock down certain zones, but they need to be modifiable enough that we can kind of move things around a bit. So, how are we going to accomplish this? Let's say, for example, that I want to do a similar dragon's teeth design to what we did before, okay? So I would set up something like this again, and you can see here that I have to do a little bit of an initial setup, which again can be a little bit tedious. And nobody wants to sit here and do this the whole time, everywhere we go. But we can set up a little basic design like this, including snipping that right there, and then we can also add that to make it nice and even. And we're going to use this as a template for a basic block. So, what I want to do is I want flamethrowers, and when you set these you can see kind of what their range is here. And what I want to do is I want them to not sit directly right here, I want them to sit back a little bit in order to be able to cover a little wider area when they get up close. So suffice it to say that we'll do not right up next to this, but we'll come back 2 tiles like so. we can cut this and move this around, adjust it a little bit. Now, these, we need to make sure that we can actually have them feed in a way that they'll have a little bit of nice crossover. So, what I'm going to do as a little reference point is I want to look at this, and I want to see this little zone right here. So I'm going to set that guy right there as a marker. I'm then going to come over here, and I want to be as even with this as I can. And if I cross like that, you can see there's a pretty wide spacing right there. Might not be ideal. So instead, why don't we come in a little bit more? And in fact, what we can do here is something really interesting. We can actually do a mirror design to make these match up a little bit more. But that's beside the point. The main goal that we want to do here is we want to ensure that we can make these spaced enough that they can be repeatable. So if I do this, and let's say I go with the max distance as such, and then hit this, this can actually work out very well for us. Then we just copy this as well. And of course, I've got problems that I have to go deal with in Paradise, so I'll be right back. Took care of that, ran out of fuel halfway through, so you know. Embarrassing stuff, but regardless. This is what we're kind of looking at for our basic design right now. So, the main thing about this is that we've got these 3 turrets here, and I'm going to add in that to the design. Now, I need to have some backup stuff, such as gun turrets, like so. What I want to do is I want to do this. This is going to bug me if it's not even there, and it's not. So I'm just going to do this to get even spacing there. But then I also want to come over here. And what I want to do is I'm actually going to do this to match spacing. Which we can see there, that's not correct. Which we can then also do a horizontal flip to ensure spacing on the rest of these. Like so. So now what I want to do is I want to use this edge right here to match up. So what I want to see is I want to see this be relatively the same to this. So I am going to come through here. Now I'm going to copy this to right here, and I want to do a horizontal flip. And I want to see if this will actually line up the way that I think it will. So I'm going to look at this and see that I have 2 tiles out. Then if I flip over here, I can see that I only have 1 tile out. So this actually is not quite right if I go here. So what I want to do then is nix this, then copy this, doing a horizontal flip that we can see there that's still not quite joining up how I want. I want it to be like this. And you know, I kind of like the way this looks with that little bit of a center bit there. It gives us like a little bit of something to look at. And this is going to be the first step of our basic blueprint here. Now, this is where we're going to get into something a little bit trickier, and that's going to be how do we actually supply all this stuff. So, there's multiple ways to do this, but essentially you're going to have some central point that you'll run and then feed all these from. Normally, I would try to do everything with belts, and I think we are going to still attempt something similar. But what we want to do, essentially here, is we're going to have a belt line that comes through. We'll have a split for every single turret. As such. Which then comes down and we'll have basically a 2-cell belt buffer to each. going along like this. And then we need to have some inserters at each stage for fueling them, which means that we have to power all this. So let me just cut this and move this up here for my own sake. So we then need to be able to power all of this appropriately. And if we do that, that gives us a nice bit of power there. Now, what I want to do here is, of course, we can do a copy and paste. But what I'm going to do instead is we're going to do a blueprint. Clicking right here, or Alt-B will work. So when I click and do this, we're then going to see how this looks in this menu. We can also name the blueprint up here. That's going to be important later. We can also set symbols for this. And I think right now this is totally fine. But in fact, let's actually change it. I want to add that to show a little bit of a defense measure. The biggest thing that's going to help about this is I'm going to do this as a wall piece, and I'm going to create the blueprint. Now, the biggest thing about this that makes it different is that you can actually hold these blueprints like so, just like what we've done with an upgrade planner. But we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to grab this and we're going to tap the B key, and you'll see I have personal blueprints, and then there are game blueprints. So I have some personal blueprints that I've made, and I've also borrowed some from other people in order to do different designs. A lot of these are my own personal designs. We're going to go over to game blueprints. The difference between this is everything stored on your local computer and accessible to any game, basically. This is your current game session, and this is also saved with other players. This is kept only for you. This is where you share blueprints with other players in your game. Very important. So I'm going to place it right here, and now I can access this at any given time that I want. Now, you'll notice here I have a standard mine blueprint, and it has a little bit of a difference on it. See that green square? That is something known as a grid. And you can see here this is a relative grid, and then there's absolute grid. The difference between these is if I come over here, snap to grid, that gives me this nice clean line right here, right? And we can see here, there's a little bit of gaps that are going to form right here as we put this down, but we can fix that later. Basically, if I do an absolute grid, we can set coordinates, and then when I place this, you'll notice that I can only go certain places with it. And when I place this, notice that there is a gap, right? So there's going to be pieces here. So if I were to, for example, place this here, notice that everything kind of copied over, but there's a little bit of a gap right there. You can, of course, fill that in later. You'll also, this is actually another thing worth noting, we'll notice that there's a substation with an electrical disconnect right here. That can be pretty important. We can also come over here and we can determine whether we want to have connection points like this, which I do prefer having something like this, so this is what we're going to go with. And essentially we just want to go right here and just kind of be in line coming up. Something that keeps it just nice and linear with it. So we've seen that we have a little bit of a discrepancy here, so I'm just going to go ahead and Control Z to undo that stuff, and then I'm just going to add one tile to each end, and then I'm going to re-blueprint it. But you don't have to make a completely new blueprint, you can change your blueprint. So coming back over here, we can right click on the wall piece, and then we can come up here to new contents for the blueprint. And we can come over here, clicking this, and now you'll see these go out to the bare edges, and we can still keep an absolute grid. We can save the blueprint, and now when we look at this, we'll come over here, and when we shift click it, now everything is connected nicely. Cool. Control Z, now let's add our other design choice. In fact, I'm gonna come back a pretty fair distance like this. And the reason I want to do that is just to keep the main power lines away from any potential issues here. Alright, so now I gotta make sure that I get this out of the way, because this is where we've been kind of dealing with stuff. So I'm gonna get this out, and then again, do contents. Try it one more time. Do contents. So now you can see here, now we have a little weird thing. Our grid size has stayed the same even though we've been editing this. That's because since we've been editing it into this, we haven't really changed the grid itself. But we can come in here and manually edit this. So I could come here and say, alright, what if I change this grid to 20? And then 22, 23, and look at that. With a 23, we now have everything perfectly enclosed in a box. I'll save this. And you'll see that because we did that, this is where the problem comes with absolute. Because we're doing absolute coordinates, this is going to basically center it, and then it can have undesirable things. This can be good for some things, but I tend to have more success with something called relative. You'll notice here that the X and Y down here at the bottom have altered. This is the origin point, basically, that you start it with. So grid position 0, 0, just leave that the same. With relative, this lets you do something very interesting. You can move this at your free will, but then you can click and drag. And then as long as you're clicking and holding, you will keep that relative position, and you can keep things running along, just like so. So that's good. You can see here now we have a way to tile and connect all of these things, which is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So, one of the issues that can happen with this, obviously, is if we don't have enough magazines, we're going to run into issues with, gun turrets along the line and all that. For now, that's not a huge deal because the flamethrowers will be able to handle most everything, and gun turrets will just kind of help to clean up the chaff. And we're also going to want to feed enough magazines to these anyway, because we're going to go for cheap yellow magazines. Now, because we're going for these cheap yellow magazines, something we can look at over here that not a lot of people know about is bonuses. We can see over here we have a damage bonus here. So yellow magazines do 5 + 1 physical. There is a damage of 20% being done there. And reds do 8 + 1.6 physical. So if you look at this, 6 to about 9. So it's not quite half. It's actually a little bit better than half right now. Eventually we'd want to do something like these uranium round magazines, but that's beside the point. Yellow magazines are very easy to produce and ship out. And just to kind of show some of the design process here, let's look at Factoriopedia and let's take a look at something here. If I were to look at iron plates, I know that I can do a stack size of 100 iron plates. If I look at magazines, I can do a stack size of 100 as well. But it takes 4 iron plates to make a single magazine. So, because of that, these can essentially store 4 iron plates worth in a single stack, which means that 400 go into one stack of magazines. Therefore, it is more beneficial to us to actually ship out completed magazines on trains. So, we want to have a place that we can then unload magazines, put them into the loop, so to speak, and then we want to also be able to provide basic materials for maintaining the walls here. Belts, basically, we don't need to worry about maintaining those because honestly, belts will either survive or they won't survive. If belts are going down, we have other problems. So we need to have magazines, we need to have oil, fluid for the flamethrower turrets here, and then we need to have, of course, the gun turrets fed with their various magazine types. So, once again, I'm just going to come over here, we're just going to kind of knit this so that we're seeing our singular design right here. We don't need to do anything right here, we're just going to feed in at some point, and then we're going to have a loop back that we will just kind of manually set depending on the length of this. But if we want to be nice and fancy, what we can do is actually go ahead and design the loop back right here. The one problem with a loop back is the longer the wall gets, the more of a problem this becomes, and the more that you have to actually feed this. So, with that in mind, it then becomes a question of, should we do the research for our drones, which, if we look over here and look at our logistic network, you'll see that in Space Age, I'd have to go through and do a science pack in order to get the coveted requester chests. Because of that, that's not really ideal for my situation right now because we haven't launched a rocket. However, in vanilla, you would be able to research that stuff before a rocket launch, and that would be an option available to you. So, what are we going to do about this? Mainly, we're just going to be able to have enough manufacturing capacity to fill full belts of this stuff, because you can see right now, this is a pretty small sector. There's some places that we're going to have really large sections that we have to cover. So to start with, let's go to a small section with this that we've made right here. Let's just make sure again that this is exactly what we've saved. Make sure it all lines up. We haven't added anything other than the reverse loop right there. And again, I'm going to just go ahead and leave that reverse loop as is. Not going to worry about the reverse loop right now. We've also taken the time to upgrade our construction robot speed, which is going to help with the construction effort a lot. So right now on the bonuses, I can show you, we have a movement speed of plus 240% because we have worker robot speed level 5. That's just to help us with a few things here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run back and I'm going to look at my modular armor, which we showed a little bit here, and I want to get a second personal roboport so I have more construction robots available at any given time, but I need some batteries for that. So, running back over to our tank, we're now going to go and set up the first stage of our defense network in a small area to know that we have a repeatable, condensed area. And we're going to hold off on the actual supply station now, because this is now going to be determined based on how we actually set up the actual defense points. Alright, so looking at this first bit, what I want to do is I want to take my wall piece here, and then I'm going to try to find somewhere that's the most optimal in terms of how I could place things, but still have good coverage of everything. Things now in the way, but this time it's a little colonizing party that's back at the base. So let's go fix that, then we'll come back and have a look at how this all looks. Alright, I got a sneaky suspicion where that one came from, so let's go see if we can take care of it. Yep, just a little patch of heaven right here. Alright, so now that we're here, we can see that with our current design, obviously there is some room for improvement. But this would work for dealing with the initial bits, of course. So what we can do over here is we can decide to just nix this bit all the way down here and fill up a whole lot of magazines. So this would allow us to fill from all the way down here. Alright. Editor Ryan again over here. I unfortunately realized how long this was taking. I couldn't really trim this down anymore, so I'm just going to kind of summarize essentially what I said while I was making this. Basically what we're doing here is we're setting up and kind of figuring out how we're going to actually feed a defense network like this, and that's going to determine how much we need to actually produce in order to feed a system like this. The idea is that we're going to feed it later. I also increased the dragon's teeth, as you can see right there. That's not really anything too pertinent, and I adjust the blueprint a little bit. But the main goal of what I wanted to show here was how blueprints are crucial and essential, especially when it comes to defense, but also for anything, a large construction project like this. It can really, really help you in the end. We didn't go too deep into anything crazy on the blueprints, like the parameterization, because this is something that doesn't really require parameterization. We also didn't really talk about the train system to actually feed this, unfortunately, as much as I really wanted to talk about it. I just didn't want to put too much time into one episode here. I already feel like I spent way too much time talking about stuff, but I also feel like there was a lot of pertinent information in this that I think would be very beneficial to anyone that's new to this. So, the only thing to really cover at this point here is pretty much that we just hook up this supply to the existing train line in a way that makes sense to us. And in this case, we're just kind of adjusting it so that it goes on the single rail here, so trains go up, can go into it, and then they'll also join back up on that same rail. We're not touching the other rail in this case because we're not anticipating needing a whole lot for that. We're going to do a more complicated train system later for that purpose. But anyway, that's going to be it for this one. Like I said, this is the penultimate episode for vanilla. We've covered a lot of ground right now, and we have all of the sciences required for vanilla in order to actually launch the rocket. Now, we're planning to launch the rocket on the next episode, but of course, as you can see, we have a lot of defense issues that may need to be covered first, but we are still going to set up for a rocket launch while we're also dealing with the defense network stuff. So, I'm still going to count this as the penultimate episode for vanilla before we go into more of the space age centered focus stuff with this. So, I hope that this has been helpful to you. Please, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything that I wasn't able to cover that I need to cover, or that you're confused on, would be a great time to do it. I'm always trying to help out as much as I can, and thank you guys so much again for sticking around for these episodes. These have been a lot more work to put out than I actually thought they were going to be. I have learned a lot in the process of doing this, and I've also increased my own knowledge, which has been very beneficial. But yeah, once again, thank you again. We're trying to hit that 1,000 subscriber mark by the end of the year, so if you could subscribe, that would be super helpful, but I totally understand if you don't want to. Likes also help out these videos a lot. It helps with the algorithm, so to speak. And comments are also really great. They let me know what you like and don't like about the video, and let me know if there's anything that I have to cover in another video, questions, concerns, and whatnot. So, yeah. Don't want to take up too much time. We're already at the 33-minute mark here, so I'm just going to go ahead and call it here, and hope to see you guys in the next one. Have a great one, and good luck.